everybody. Good to be with you guys. Always great to be able to just see you worship and be able to just be right here in this place with you. This is week number 3 of our series called Living Legacy, and we're going to kind of close it out tonight. And I want to ask you a couple questions as we get started. They're not necessarily fun questions. You may not like them, but I'm going to ask them. It's all around this idea of a legacy. What is a legacy? A legacy is really just the mark that we leave on the world. And whether you like it or not, your life is going to leave some kind of mark on this world. And so here are some questions I want to have you think about that maybe will help us get started, okay? Here's the first one. How long do you want to live? Well, forever's a good answer, but in, this initial life, like how long do you want to live? What would be the ideal point where you're like, okay, I'm tired of being old. I think I'd like to check out now. What are you planning on here? What are you thinking? Does anybody, you can raise your hand, it's okay. Does anybody feel like I'm kind of shooting for 100 here? I'm going for triple digits. Triple digits, okay. Not very many people. Not very many people, but a couple of you, okay. Okay, let me ask you. How many of you are, when you think about that question, you're at least somewhere in your 90s? If I could get to my 90s, I'm good with that. 90s, people? Come on, it's okay, own it. I'd like to be there. 90 years old would be great. If I could kind of get there, that'd be great. Are you guys at least at 80? You're at least at the 80-year-old mark? Everybody, if you're at least at 80, whether you're 90 or you're 100, you're at least at 80. Can you raise your hand? We're in the 80-year-old or more club. Is there somebody here who doesn't want to live till you're 80? You want to be out before then? Damn it. Going to be out before a few of you? Okay, a few of you want to be out before you're 80. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay, here's the next question. Again, not necessarily that fun of a question, but just think about it with me. What's your guess on the percentage of people right now, or at least lately, that live until they're 70? The percentage of people, how old do you have to be? Let's do some math. What year did you have to be born in to be 70 years old right now? 1951-ish, right? Okay, so listen, we're talking about the people who were born before then, right? 1951 or before then. What percentage of them live till they're just 70? What's your guess? What's this? Let me hear from this side. What percent live till they're 70? What do you guys think? 45. Anybody else? 43? 60%. That was the loudest answer. Okay, middle row, I'm going to call on somebody. Who can I call on? Who's got me? What do you think? No. What is the actual percent is the question. Okay, let me ask someone else. KK, would you be willing to answer? 37. Wow, you guys are not very optimistic about this generation. What about this section? Oh, and what do you think? I can't hear you, bro. 41. Wow, you guys are, I thought you would think more optimistically. Okay, listen. Right now, about 43% of people are living until they're 70. That's the statistic. That's not a 2021 statistic. It's a little bit of an old statistic, but it's kind of lately. That's where the statistic is, about 43%. Okay, now, there are people who get paid to make predictions about your estimated age of death, okay? I know it's not fun to think about. Let me ask you this. I want you to think about something. Right now, the estimation is that this maybe is good news. It was 43% currently, but for you guys, they estimate that 83% will live till they're 70. Pretty good. That's pretty good news. Decent. It's not bad. They estimate that 67%, roughly 2/3 of you, will make it to 80. That's great news. 2/3. But let me just put some things in perspective, okay? Let me just put some things in perspective. Listen. I don't know, we've had about 160, 170 students lately, and here's what this means. This means that about 30 of you are not even going to make it till you're 70. We have somebody volunteering. About 30 of you are not even going to make it till you're 70. Like the odds are decent, okay? About, what's the statistic? It's only 7% here, but about 7% of you are not even going to make it till you're 60, they think. So that's 12 of you. But I want you to understand something. Just think about this with me for a second. Just kind of think on this. Not everybody in this room is going to live a long life. Don't respond to that. I want you to soak that in for a second. Not everybody in this room, statistically, with this many people, they would say that 98% of you will make it till you're 40. That means 2% of you in this room. That means probably 3 or 4 of you will not make it till you're 40. Listen, think about it, soak it in. That's not a lot. The chances are good, okay? But I think somewhere inside of all of us, we just get it that life is short, that your time is short. Whether you're 40 or you're 80, life is actually not that long. Like a lot of you will make it till you're 70, but you'll probably work till you're 67, 68. I mean, you get done working and it's over. No, maybe not for all of you. But life is fragile. There is a preciousness to it because it is short. It comes and it goes. And when we talk about this idea of a legacy, I really believe that every single one of us is in somewhere in our heart asking the question, how do I want to be remembered? What do I want people to remember about me? And I want you to think about something else as you maybe process that on your own. As we talk about a legacy, as we talk about the mark that you'll leave on the world, one of the things that is really apparent to me that I think is as clear as it can be, at least at this point in my life, is that everybody's legacy actually lives in a similar zone. Like you have this incredible power to make a mark on the world and to make a difference and to leave a legacy and to tell a story, but everybody's legacy kind of lives in the same place. You have this power to leave a mark, but you don't really have the power to determine what I would call the guiding force of your legacy. So I want to do something that might make you uncomfortable a little bit. I have had the opportunity, and I count this as such a blessing, to connect with a local funeral home here in town. This funeral home has called me in to be a pastor at 9 funerals just this year. And I want to tell you briefly about 6 of them. I'm going to put them on the screen. These are pictures of 6 individuals that I have this year officiated their funeral. Can I just tell you about these people? I want to tell you about the things that they were remembered for. The first one in the upper left-hand corner is Donald Newman. Donald died February 1st this year. He was 69 years old. And Donald was married, had a daughter, and Donald came out as gay for the last 40 years of his life. And I had the privilege of stepping in to that funeral and being a part of that and hearing his story. I listened to his daughter. I listened to his best friend. Her name is Marta. I listened to them talk about Donald. And they said the first word that describes Donald is just giving. Like that was his legacy. He would raise money. He fought cancer for a long time, and he would try to raise money to give to Riley Children's Hospital and to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. That was like a passion of his. That was what he was remembered for. That's Donald Newman, February 1st. The next one is Caleb Zepeda. Caleb died on March 13th. He was 21 years old, and I got to be a part of his funeral, and I got to listen to his family. I sat in his mom's home as they talked about Caleb's life, and Caleb was fun. He had a big laugh. He was gentle, and he was kind. They told me he felt things deeply. He was a deep feeler. And he had an especially big love for his family, especially his niece. He had a niece named Anivia, and he loved his niece. That was Caleb. The next one is Anivia Johnson. Anivia is someone that maybe some of you guys know. Dylan is here with us tonight, is Dylan's sister. And Dylan gave me permission to talk about Anivia. Him and I just chatted a little bit this week, and he said, absolutely. I just want to tell you about Anivia. She died on May 23rd this year. She was 18 years old. And Anivia was kind-hearted. She was sweet. She was sensitive. She loved hugs. She loved to snuggle. She was her mom's best friend. That's Anivia. Next one down here, lower left, Ron Kaufman. He died June 5th, 63 years old. Ron was stingy. And I'm not kidding. That was one of the first things his family said about Ron. He didn't like to let people borrow things. He would get annoyed if you talked to him too long. He would even tell his family if they were talking too long, he would just say, bye. That's what he would do. Like, they remember that about Ron. Just the last 2 weeks here, Stacy, I did Stacy's funeral. She was 59 years old. She died on August 18th, just days ago. She was remembered for her close relationship with her only son, Hendrix. He talked about her as an excellent mom. They called each other regularly. They talked to each other consistently. He remembered Stacy as someone who was so accepting of all his friends. The last one's Deb Kinnair. Her daughter just said she was the best mom I could ever have. Her husband said she was a good wife. She never lied or cheated, but she gave me a lot of lip. That was his comment about Deb. And I just want you to think about this for a second. Like, I know I got your attention with Donald, didn't I? I got your attention with that one, I think. Just my opportunity to step in with that family, to sit down with them and talk about his life and what he was remembered for. And I actually was the one to bring out his sexuality in that conversation. I told them as a pastor, this is something that people in the room are going to be thinking about. Like, where does this come into play? And I just talked to them about where I was at. I told them that I'm a part of a church and that I personally believe that God's design for marriage is between and only between a man and a woman. But I've looked into this conversation as a church. We've studied this whole topic and just really tried to think, what is our approach here? And we've come to realize there's actually a study that was done that we talked about last winter as a youth group that shows they talk to people who are gay, and they ask them, those that were not religious, they asked them, they said, why aren't you religious? Why don't you want to go to church? And the vast majority of them would tell you that the reason they're not religious, if they aren't religious, not all people who are gay are not religious, but the reason they aren't is not because of the church's theology. It's because they don't feel they can go there and be loved. And I just told this family, I told Don's daughter and his best friend, I said, as a church, we do believe this about marriage, but we believe that everybody is precious in God's sight, every human being. God is not anti-anybody. And they just looked at me and they said, thank you. Thank you. And I had the opportunity at Don's funeral and at Caleb's funeral, at Anivia's funeral, and on, to just share the good news that no matter what you've done, God still loves you, and that Jesus Christ died for you, that he gave his very life to give you a living hope, that death would lose its hold on you, that your life could be something brand new. And I get to share that at every funeral I do. Now, I'm not up here to necessarily talk about that specifically, but I want to make a point. If you were listening to me at all, maybe you find yourself reminded, or maybe for the first time, maybe would you just think with me? There are so many things in this world that we get so bent out of shape about. We get so caught up in, it's so wrapped up in. And I look out, especially 2020 and 2021, I have never seen a group of students so divided as to what I have this year. I have never seen a high school or a community so divided as what I see. And I just find myself thinking, none of that is where your legacy lives. None of it is. Not your politics, not your sexuality. It was not Don's sexuality that had anything to do with the mark that he left on the world. And I know these things are on your mind. I know you guys are thinking about, where do I stand with this political view or that one, or where do I stand with this position or that one? I mean, if you guys want to know where we stand on some of these things, we did a whole series last winter called Hard Conversations. And I would love for you to go back and look at what we said about topics like racism. Look at what we said about sexuality. We've spent a whole night on it. We interviewed Lori Krieg, incredible interview. We dove into God's word. It's on our YouTube page. Go to YouTube, Pathway High School, search it, look at it, look into it. But I'm here to tell you, those things, that's not where your legacy lives. Not at all. It's actually real simple. Everybody's legacy, the mark that you leave on the world, I think it's guided primarily by who or what we love. Period. Who or what we love. Whether you're Donald or you're Anivia or you're Caleb, whether you're 18 or you're 68, that's where your legacy lives. Everybody's. Whether you're religious or not, whatever it is or whoever it is that you love, that's what will define your legacy. I'm not kidding. That's every story, every life story, every funeral. That's what it is. Who or what you love. For most people, it's a who. Most people's legacy is told in terms of who they loved, how they loved them, and who loved them. And I want you to ask the question tonight, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to line up at your deathbed and thank you for? Are we just wandering aimlessly through life? Just whatever desire comes to my mind, whatever sound, whatever argument I want to jump into. And what if we, just like we saw in that little video, what if we lived intentionally? What if we actually gave this some thought and we embraced the fact that this life, this initial life of mine, it is short. No day is guaranteed for me. And so how do I want to be remembered? But I think at this point, the vast majority of you are beginning to ask a second question. It's not just how do I want to be remembered? Maybe the more important question is how does God want me to be remembered? What is it that God wants me to experience as I try to be a living legacy? What does God look at for my life and dream about when he thinks about the mark that I leave on the world? And what's so great about asking that question is God clearly tells us. I want to read to you Matthew 25. This is a passage where Jesus talks about the end of time, the end of this world, a moment when every human being has passed. All of our initial lives have gone. Whether you were 18 or 68, everyone is gone. That initial life is over in Matthew 25, verse 31. Just read this with me. This is Jesus talking. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations, every human being who has ever lived will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me. Man, what scary words. You who were cursed into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger and needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. As hard as this passage is to hear, as uncomfortable as some of these conversations make us, I want to tell you something. God's dream for your legacy is not just that it would be defined by who or what you love. God's dream for your legacy is that you would be remembered by how you loved the people who need it most. That is God's dream for the mark he would wish for you to leave on this world. When he returns with all his angels in all his glory, his dream for you is, did you love the people who need it most in your life? And how did you love those people who needed you in their time of desperation? How did you move towards those people? And so this means that a critical question, I think the big question, and this is really the one thing I want to ask you tonight. If you would think about this with me, and would you ask this for yourself, who needs my love the most right now? Who is that? Maybe the key to a living legacy is asking the question, who needs my love the most? How will I respond to the person who needs me right now in my life? And I'm going to try to draw out some things with you because I really want you to process this, because this could make all the difference for you. When you see things like the hungry and the thirsty and a stranger and a prisoner, who is that for you right now as a high school student? Can we just talk about them? I'm going to just quickly go through these 5, and all I want you to do is ask with me tonight. Maybe ask God, God, who is this for me? The first one is the person who was hungry, the person who was thirsty. I would call that person, maybe we could just call them the poor. There are people around you that lack basic needs. And what does Jesus invite you to do? The word is bold and underlined, and it's a blank in your notes if you want to write it in. What's the verb? Do you see it in the verse right under that point? Gave. He invites you to give. Hey, I know you don't want me to ask you this tonight, okay? But I'm going to do it because I love you. When you think about your future and you think about all that you dream of to come, you think about life in your 20s, life in your 30s. Maybe you think about your family. You think about your job, and you may not have any idea, but you think about it. And you think about all the money you want to make. Do you have any thought about what you'll give? Any at all? Is that in any way a part of your dream? Is that in any way a part of the legacy that you want to live? Are you willing tonight to say, God, would you help me to not be that person who comes to church and goes on Sunday and comes on Wednesday and gives nothing when this congregation is trying to meet the needs of the poor in our world? If you were here last Wednesday, you heard from a man who is living his life in Thailand trying to minister to some of the poorest people on the planet. And I celebrate the fact that you guys gave $691 last week. That is amazing for high school students. I celebrate the fact that over the course of the previous semester, you gave another $500 some dollars. And tomorrow morning, Devin is coming to the Pathway office, and we're going to give him $1,200 tomorrow morning. I celebrate that. But are you giving? When we have our next Change for Change on October 13th, will you give something? Will you make that part of your legacy, whether it's a quarter or a dollar or just a 10% of what you've made? And when you dream about your future, will you dream about a life where you give and you make a difference, where you actually help those who lack basic needs? And the truth is, not everybody in our life is hungry or thirsty, but what about the person who doesn't have a ride? What about the person who doesn't have a good home? And maybe you can invite them in. Maybe you could welcome them. Man, interesting. The second one is the stranger. And I kind of think this might be like the one who is outside of my friend group. And he says, I was a stranger and you invited me. Guys, girls, I don't know who it is, but maybe there's somebody you don't know. They're not in your friend group, and they need you. They need you to see them. They need you to notice them. They need you to welcome them. They need you to invite them in to some of the incredible things that you've found in your life. I'm going to kind of burn through these fast here. Let me give you a third one. This is the one needing clothes. This is absolutely the toughest one in this passage. We don't seem to have this, and we don't actually understand this one in our society. Clothing in Jesus' time, clothing was valuable. It was hard to come by. Clothing was very expensive to make. When Jesus was crucified, if you read that story again, remember the moment where it says he was wearing a garment that was sewn without any seams. It was a seamless garment. And that was so precious to those soldiers that they cast lots because they did not want to tear that garment. Clothing was expensive. Clothing was a sign of status. Clothing said something about who you are. And I want to ask you, is there someone who is of low status or maybe low social standing? Maybe their status on your team, they're not a starter. Maybe their status in the class is they're not at the top. Maybe their status in whatever social structure you're around, maybe they're not highly regarded. And Jesus says, you can give them value. You can make them feel the love that they have. You can do that. You can clothe them. You can help them see who they really are. Let me give you a fourth one. I was sick and you looked after me. This is the one I think there are a lot of people around us that are just spiritually sick in that sense. Jesus was known often to comment on his passion for those who were lost and spiritually sick. In Matthew, he has this moment where he calls one of his disciples, it's actually the disciple that wrote the book named Matthew. He calls him out of a sinful life, and the religious leaders come to Jesus and they say, why are you doing that? Why are you hanging out with sinners? And Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. And I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And there is somebody who is spiritually sick or broken, and God just says, look after her. Look after him. You look after them. Let me give you a last one. This is maybe the hardest one. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. You know who needs your love the most? It's the one who doesn't deserve it. It's the one who's committed crimes against you. The one who has wronged you. The one who has hurt you. Maybe you can relate to this. Have you ever had someone in your life who says they love you, but what they actually love is their version of who they think you should be? You ever had that? A lot of you have that. They say they love you, but what they actually love is their version of who they think you should be. And what is your temptation and mine? Is to only love the version of them that I think they should be. And as hard as it is for me to say this, if we only love when it's easy, have we ever loved at all? You know who needs your love the most? It's the one who doesn't know how to love, or the one who messed up in your life. He or she needs your love. And I want to invite you to go to them, to take the initiative. That visiting someone in prison, that was an act of kindness. And that can be you. We're going to close in a song tonight. I'm going to invite our team to come up. They're going to lead us as we do that. And I just want to give you a couple final thoughts. One of the dangers of this passage is it kind of appears like Jesus is saying, hey, this is how you're saved. Like, this is how you can enter eternal life. This is how you can, when I return, be welcomed as the sheep into my kingdom. That's really not true. He's not telling you how to be saved, at least not in the sense of doing these things. Our salvation doesn't come from the things that we do. It doesn't come from the loving things that we're going to try to incorporate into our lives. Did you catch what Jesus was saying? Whatever you did for the least of these, who did you do it for? You did it for Jesus. And whether or not on that final day, when you cross over, whether or not you are accepted, will be because and only because of whether or not you are connected by faith to Jesus Christ. That is what saves you. And when you find him in your life, the love that you find in him begins to naturally overflow out of you. What Jesus is saying is when you see the poor and you see the people who are not in your friend group, when you see those who are maybe of low standing in whatever context they're in, when you see those who don't deserve your love and you see them and you move towards them, what he's asking you to do is to do that because he has loved you. Because do you remember that you were poor before him? That you had a debt of sin you could not pay. And he saw that and he decided in your poverty to come and pay your price by his death on the cross. He saw you when you were outside of a friendship with God and he came to you and he invited you to be a part of his family. Jesus saw you when you were in low standing in the kingdom of heaven and he covers your every sin and your every wrong moment. Jesus saw you when you were spiritually sick and broken and he looks after you. And he is there for you. And he saw you in the moment where you so didn't deserve his love. And he came to you. And he's there for you. And he loves you again and again. To him, you are the one who needs his love the most. And he gives it to you. Let me just end with this. One of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King Jr. On February 4th, 1968, weeks before he died, he talked about his own funeral. He talked about what he'd want to be said at the end of his life. He said, if any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. If you get someone to deliver the eulogy, tell him not to talk too long. Every now and then I wonder what I want him to say. Tell him not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell him not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell him not to mention where I came or went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. And I want to ask you, are you willing to let this be your story? Are you willing to try and say, Lord, make that my legacy? Around you in the room are some tables. On those tables is a simple card, and there are some pens. That card simply says at the top, whatever you do for, and then it has a blank space. And at the bottom it says, you do for me. And I want to invite you, as the band sings, would you be willing to get up and grab one of those? And maybe even to write something in that space. Maybe you need to write someone's initials and you take it with you as a reminder to say, God, help me to remember whatever I do for this person or for this group or in this area of my life. I do it for you. And Lord, help me to make that my legacy.